Dearly beloved, we are gathered today to bear witness to each other in our finest moments, through our greatest pains, with the fiercest unconditional love, alongside each other in our deepest struggles, to offer support and nurturing, to provide challenge and opposition in the name of transformation, the messy, scarring, glorious process of transformation.
Welcome to our podcast, Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley. You've just heard Sounds from the Field, Burning Man 2019, just an hour before the man burns. And in the rest of the podcast, you're going to hear the team of researchers, faculty, graduate students, undergraduate students that joined together to shape a collaborative and innovative project in which we translate our ethnographic findings into a virtual reality experience. And you'll get to have a sampling, a taste of that virtual reality experience soundscape. And we'll begin by discussing how this project, Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley, connects to a larger multi-decade project, the Silicon Valley Cultures Project. So starting literally more than 30 years ago, when I came to San Jose State to create the Silicon Valley Cultures Project, the idea was that this was a culturally distinctive area, particularly around a number of different factors of the fascination with technology, the revolution and innovations in the way work is being done, a really globally diverse population in the workforce and in the communities, and with all the things that kind of come with bringing people from radically different cultures and having them go to school together and work together and be in public spaces together, that there was a great experiment in diversity that was really quite dissimilar from 19th century immigration stories and the kinds of experiments we saw in the great eastern cities, for example, of New York. Then the other piece that is a little bit more intangible is how the people here think about and relate to the concept of Silicon Valley. And so most of the work that I've done over the last few decades has really been focused on the work that people do in Silicon Valley, not just the technical work, not just engineers, but nannies and hairdressers and teachers and chefs, the whole array of people. But then I started to see those subtle indicators that there were attitudes that were creeping in from the surrounding counterculture and from the way that counterculture was absorbed into some of these workplaces. And so I wanted to understand how those values that are associated with the counterculture are being integrated into the kinds of technologies that are going to be influencing the world in the 2020s and 2030s. How do we know that? How do we talk to those people and see what they value and how that translates into their work? And so my thought was that we would try and figure out what the cultures of Silicon Valley are, and then what are people countering? If there are surveillance technologies that are inherent in every high-tech workplace, you are badged and observed and judged pretty consistently. And where does the counterculture fit into that? If you're told to be creative, but also productive and obedient, how does the counterculture fit into that? And we had an opportunity to see, what does this mean in the 2020s? How is this playing out? And I thought, we have got a dynamite ethnographic project here. Having a project that goes for 30 years in Silicon Valley means that just as the technologists are surfing different waves of innovation, from personal computers to software to internet to the Internet of Things, that we are thinking as anthropologists, how do these different technologies shape and reshape the social life of the people that produce it and the people that are affected by it? And of course, social media has been part of the big story of the 21st century, as well as the creation of big tech, of large mega companies that consume startups and grow ever bigger in a way that was distinctly different from the Silicon Valley of the 1990s. And part of the phenomena that's been happening in the last decade is the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things means that since sensors are now cheaper and more ubiquitous, and our ability to connect with them through mobile technologies is so relatively easy, that there's a whole host of chip-embedded devices in our everyday lives. So that gave us an opportunity to think about, what about the people that are producing that Internet of Things technology, including the technologies of mimicry, like virtual reality and augmented reality. In the Silicon Valley Cultures Project, one of the metaphors that I've often used in talking about Silicon Valley is a double helix, when one of the strands was technology, but the other is diversity, and that the diversity does get underreported, or it gets distorted in the way we think about it. This is an area with 40% foreign born, and in the technological workforce, it can go up to that over 75% could be foreign born. And yet, it is a particular kind of diversity, a diversity that pulls in talent from across the world, from the most highly educated and elite universities across the planet. And it does exclude many of the local people. How do you genuinely create an atmosphere of social justice in a region which is so skewed economically and so riddled with inequalities? Typically, in most scholarly research, we refer to the counterculture as something in opposition to the dominant culture. And I think there are a couple of things that we need to do as anthropologists to unpack that. First, what is the dominant culture? And we have a sense of that in the workforce of Silicon Valley, that much of the workforce of Silicon Valley works in organizations that were influenced by a dominant culture of the military industrial complex, and that produced a certain set of values. The other we need to do as anthropologists is not use counterculture in the singular, that there is no one counterculture. There are things that are countercultural, and there are countercultures. And because there isn't one opposition to one dominant group, different communities have different forms of resistance. And that we really need to think about, what are the ways in which people think about their own values and their own behaviors as countering some facet of capitalism that they're resisting. And so what we're doing is really looking at, what are the many ways in which countercultural resistance can be expressed and can be made real in Silicon Valley. Each of us carved out a particular segment of Silicon Valley's technical and business and standard dominant culture to think about, but also the countercultural responses to that. We each carved out a niche to pursue. I took Burning Man as my focal point because that was a place where the counterculture had developed for the last more than a couple of decades, but it evolved out of an experience in San Francisco, and more, the power of Silicon Valley shaped the experiences of Burning Man. I wanted to be like the people that I was working with, my interlocutors who want to play with other people. And I wanted to see what other people could bring to the project that I would never think of. And so I invited you all to carve out a piece that each of you took and ran with. So could you say a little bit about the piece that you carved out and ran with? Cheryl.
I had an interesting situation where my son-in-law became involved in the cannabis industry. So in my time in the counterculture, cannabis was illegal. And then now I have a family member who works in that industry. And so for me, it was fascinating to start to take a look at what that meant. What does it mean when something that's a counterculture and then all of a sudden now it's legal, and what happened with that? So that's the way it started. But quickly it became an issue of equity and how a position that people who were jailed in the 60s and 70s still didn't have the equity in them being able to become entrepreneurs in the cannabis space. Could and who couldn't, and what was counterculture and what was acceptable business practice.
Melanie.
Well, I think because I started the project a little bit further into it, you guys had already been working on a lot of these areas. Ella and Jasmine were doing a lot around food. Cheryl was looking at cannabis. I was interested in jumping on the food train there and joining their little crew and looking at a different aspect of it. And especially thinking about food. Food comes from nature, or does it? What does food come from? What do we consider natural food and why?
And Ella, could you pick up and talk a little bit about how the technologies of social media intersect with food? Because that was the piece that you were pursuing.
The ones that mainly come to mind are things like Yelp, where so much of that is hinged on pictures of food. And so many decisions for where you go to eat is, how does the food look? What should I order based on these photos? And it's just that relationship where you can look at something and it decides such a major aspect of your life and day-to-day practices. And then I had also come across this South Korean trend and their relationship with food, which was just their whole fascination with mukbangs, which are eating broadcasts where the food is front and center. That's the main focus of these videos, but on the back, they're telling a story. So you have a companion while you eat. And it's just a whole experience where you're meant to feel comfortable and relaxed the entire time.
One of the questions that we wanted to explore was the relationship of technology and nature. And one of the powerful theoretical tools we have to think about is the mimicry of nature and what decisions are made in shaping how nature is represented. So I think social media is a really interesting way that people take something that is supposedly natural and turns it into something that is highly curated. And the other space that we explored a lot in our project was how virtual reality did that, how virtual reality and augmented reality layered onto nature. Kevin, you kind of picked up on that VR piece and ran with it. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
And I switched to VR mainly because I have a very strong interest in digital. My upbringing included a lot of video games and science fiction, and about what technology ought and could do. So naturally, I was drawn to, and I own a VR headset myself, was already aware of the capabilities, but I hadn't really explored what other people thought of VR or how it had been used. So I wanted to look into what types of spaces were integrating digital technologies like VR and how they were doing work through them.
Jasmine.
I was fascinated by the idea that here in the Bay Area, people were already being able to come face to face with robots in restaurants. It wasn't this like far-fetched idea. Like, people were actually getting into lines and buying food, like coffee, fast food, from robots already. Is that robot actually visible to them? Like, have the people who designed this dining experience, have they made it visible that there is a robot producing the food? And in the cases that I studied, it was transparent. It was in the forefront. The first place I studied was an actual restaurant space. I also studied a robotic automation development company where they were working on the actual mechanics behind the scenes. At the beginning, it was coming in and thinking we would talk a lot about the mechanics of their work. But the way our conversations went, it turned into a lot about their spirituality and their desire to, a lot of our conversations went to, needing to spend time doing martial arts or needing to spend time in nature as almost like a way that they spent their time outside of work to kind of balance such a focus on efficiency and productivity that I found really fascinating and really human. Like, our conversation was really, really, really human.
Daniel, you brought something really, really different to our project. Could you talk a little bit about that?
What stood out to me the most about this is that early on we kept throwing around this concept of counterculture. And I was drawn to this idea, right? Once I learned that the counterculture we were looking into was one that underlined Silicon Valley. I naturally was gravitating to subcultures that were counterculturing that counterculture. Who are the people who make up this counterculture of the counterculture? Naturally, I gravitated to musicians and artists, but not just any musician, not any artist. Women or artists who self-identified as women and who self-identified as Latinx women, right? That was whose voice I wanted to try and give a platform. My gaze was more on who were the ones that were outside of that, who lived in this area we call Silicon Valley, but who were not necessarily directly involved with it.
And Daniel, I would say that throughout this project, we struggled with what inclusion meant. Inclusion not only for those that participate in capitalism, but those who participate in the counterculture, and how to create a platform to include our entire team in the presentation of our data to the world. And we struggled with trying to find a product, a presentation style that would allow us to do that. And Jasmine, you brought in the catalyst for us to think about this VR immersive experience through your class with Tina Karani on those kinds of immersive media. And could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
The class was beyond storytelling. It was very much like really actually creating virtual worlds as part of our assignments. And so I needed content for that. And I used my ethnographic skills to collect that content through observations and interviews, because I was so excited about the possibility of these two mediums together. The ability to collect data through anthropology, the ability to design and tell a story with VR. This working group was a place that we could explore it. And
we had a massive brainstorming session and realized that we were talking to all the people we were talking to as workers. And so that work was one of the central cultural themes of what we were looking at. And then it hit us, a co-working space. This is a space which legitimately exists. And one of the tensions we had in creating a place is we had imagined a plausible co-working space that would have an attached maker space for food, / kitchen / cafe, that would have an attached Zen garden where workers could go meditate. But we wanted to have something that expressed life outside the workplace in the community, because so much of what people were telling us was about how they thought about community and were trying to shape the community and empower the community. And critical to that conversation was the vision of art. So we wanted to create a space that was outside that would allow people to discuss public art.
I think the art really speaks to these kind of utopian ideas that exist in the Bay Area, and which is really being able to explore and project what could be our best future.
If you were to be in our virtual reality experience, as you walk into the co-working space, you would walk into a lobby where you would see Reengineering nature in Silicon Valley, and you would interact with the people at that lobby desk as you would in any other corporate setting or nonprofit setting throughout the Valley. And then you would go to a room where you would learn a little bit about the project and meet the team. And then you would go into the co-working space where you would see a variety of desks. And on those desks are objects that represent the kind of work that people do. Maybe you would see a Tibetan bell that someone has put there to remind them of the kind of spiritual experience they may have in a different part of their life. Maybe you'll see something that indicates, oh, this person is a cannabis entrepreneur. As you look at those different objects, you would interact with the voices that you would hear related to those objects. As you go into the food maker space, you'll see a very industrial kitchen. You will see an image of a robot on the wall. As you leave that kitchen / cafe / food maker space and enter the Zen garden, you'll see a simplified space with some rock art. You'll hear the sounds of running water. You'll see plants. They're shaped, but they're also natural, and they reflect the passing of the seasons. You'll be in a very curated version of nature. And then as you leave the entire co-working space, you'll go into an area which looks suspiciously like the Plaza of Cesar Chavez in downtown San Jose. And then you'll see a bus station where people are waiting to get on with their lives. You're experiencing only a sample of the larger VR installation. When you go into these spaces, there are opportunities to hear at least 50 different voices talking about different aspects of their experience, of their values, of how they live and work in Silicon Valley. We're only giving you a taste of that larger experience. Join us in the soundscape of this VR experience.
Now we're in the lobby of the Silicon Valley Learning Museum. As you explore this active co-working space, you will find people working side by side for very different kinds of projects. The co-working space is the largest space and the one that most clearly explores the values of countercultural capitalism. After you leave our co-working space, you can visit the Cave Kitchen, a food maker space where people come to create new products, services, and communities. Just outside the co-working space is a Zen garden, modeled after the Zen gardens found in the Bay Area. This space captures some of the complex and nuanced way in which Silicon Valley workers experience nature and culture. Outside another door you can go to the street, and there you will find a public plaza, where muralists showcase their art and people talk about the challenges of community building. You are now in the co-working space, a place where people from different organizations come to work and exchange ideas. In this co-working space, you'll find people from really different work and cultural backgrounds. A couple are engineers working in the Internet of Things, sensors, and virtual reality. Others are designers, biotechnology entrepreneurs, community activists, therapists, and artists. Some are cannabis entrepreneurs and advocates experimenting with the boundary between capitalism and the counterculture. You will read questions on different tables, and the quotations you hear around them consider those queries. As you wander through their workspaces, you will find triggers near appropriate artifacts, such as books or posters. Activate those triggers and you can hear what the people the ethnographers interviewed have to say as they reflect on work and life in Silicon Valley.
My name is Monica. I am an engineer and a wellness therapist. I went to Gunn High School, which is a very well-respected high school, and that I would say I received a great education from. But that is, I think, a really hard space to not feel pressure to excel in a lot of ways that are very hard to excel in. You know, it's not that I blame the school. I think it's really hard to avoid. It's just in an area where all of the adults in the area, you know, all the people you respect and role models are CEOs or software engineers or professors. It's like all the adults in this area are very high earning and very accomplished in the kind of narrowly defined way of earning a lot of money and reaching a high career path goal or something. So I think it's hard, just in that setting, to not assume that that's what success means. I think it's the vibe of everybody there, kind of, to take care of themselves and to improve their wellness in some way.
My name is Matrix. I am a biotechnologist and a scientist. At Burning Man, I had an epiphany. I have always thought, the way people do, that things that are important are permanent or long-lasting. Whether we build something, make a scientific discovery, or make some other mark on the world, we want to leave the world a better place. We derive our sense of self from being able to do that. Leaving that mark translates into meaning. I found out Burning Man is not permanent. It is transient. It is nothing but sound and a tremendous gathering of people. And then it's sound again. It's like a giant sound modeler. There is a spiritual dimension to Burning Man, and it's one of the main reasons for going back. I'm not particularly a spiritual person. Being a scientist in many ways is spiritual. Science is a non-spiritual religion. Science is a belief system that gives meaning to things. We have a lot of questions that give life meaning. Why are we here? Fundamentally, science is also a way to answer the why. Much of it is what, but it deals with why in an orthogonal way. It is a search for meaning. The same structure, the same comfort. Science is a way of understanding the world.
You are now in the cafe kitchen. People in the co-working space come here to eat and socialize, but the space is more than a cafe. A lot of the people here are entrepreneurs in food tech, experimenting with the ways technology and food interact. Others are trying to figure out the connections between food, culture, and identity, often through social media. They are often advocates for food justice. Several are food artists. Food workers show us one of the best windows for seeing how the values of sustainability and profitability compete to shape our futures.
I am Jessica, a waitress and mukbang creator. I would definitely say growing up I identified as Chinese, Laotian, and Vietnamese. But I always identified as Vietnamese because that was the kind of food my mom always cooked at home. Not necessarily because I actually had a Vietnamese background as an ethnicity. So growing up and realizing that food does not define my culture, it really affected how I presented myself and what I identified with. So now I only identify with Chinese, Laotian, American. I don't really identify with that Vietnamese side anymore. Although food and culture is very important, I don't think it was valid for me to identify as Vietnamese American in that sense.
My name is Anatole, and I'm in food tech. We could consider a hierarchy of wellness, and an organization should contribute to all those senses of wellness. I would say that's kind of the fundamental way that we look at it. So if we start looking at those tiers on the pyramid, at the bottom you need to be fed, and the advantage of having our technology is we can of course reduce the price of food. McDonald's has put a tremendous amount of things like ammonia into meat to keep it sanitary, reducing the incidences of disease. The robot does it right every time. One of our partners puts it pretty well. He goes, McDonald's can't convince people to wash their hands and have to put the soap in the food. Maybe going a step up from there. There's the general enjoyment that you get from eating, and that would be whether the flavor profiles are more interesting and nuanced. That general human satisfaction you get from that, to the raw experiences of fun. Is it conducive to having good conversation? That kind of thing. And then above that, I think there's learning more about yourself. I guess this is like the self-actualization piece on the top of that pyramid. Can you learn more about yourself by exploring new flavors and learning more about what you actually desire? Are there parts of your humanity that you haven't uncovered yet and might uncover?
You are now in the Zen Garden. The ethnographers ask people about their experiences and feelings about technology and nature. In the history of the American counterculture, nature holds special meaning. So what they have to say about reengineering nature matters. The people you meet here don't all agree about what exactly constitutes nature, but they do agree that nature is valuable and find it emotionally and spiritually transformative. Silicon Valley's workforce is global. Nearly 40% of the population is foreign-born, so the attitudes they bring reflect a melding of Bay Area and home country values. Listen for that nuance.
I am Marissa, a social worker and psychedelic therapist. Nature to me is where the natural elements are the focus and really empower the space. And so the opportunity to hear the bird or rustling water, to hear the frogs at night, that to me is nature. This park is wonderful, this is great, but I would never describe this as nature. It's beautiful, but it's not empowering. Definitely nature is a space of wellness for me. You know, it's funny when I think of wellness and the marketing of wellness, I'm like, oh, it's the gym. But it's not really wellness in the holistic approach. When I'm walking in nature, I feel well. My body feels good. My eyes are really happy to see all the beauty. The sounds are comforting. And then I also think wellness could also be around family, that feeling connection, where you feel safe and your body feels safe and you're well connected.
My name is Patrick and I am a food tech engineer. I love nature and I'm realizing more and more that I need more of it in my life. The environment is very unnatural and kind of getting back to nature kind of helps to reset. We're in this area where, man, it's just cars and highways, and I feel anxious just thinking about it, and people are just trying to get to work, and looking out for number one a lot of the times. And you see a lot of things in life and on the street, and it's just like, people get so caught up in it, it breaks them, it changes them. You know what I mean? And at least for me, being able to just remove myself from all of that, get the hell off my phone for a little bit. It's a literal and figurative breath of fresh air, for sure, that I need to work more into. Otherwise, you feel suffocated and start going crazy.
You are here outside of the building, in the public plaza. There people are talking about the tension between profit and community, and how to use art to reveal possible futures for the communities they live in. So as you move around this plaza, you will see some of the art and hear from some of those artists. But you will also hear from some of the community activists and social entrepreneurs who also struggle to navigate the very real presence of corporate capitalism and the equally real presence of those trying to create a different path forward.
My name is Adila, and I am a design researcher. I am from India. Being able to actually step out and actually see the culture of the world I was embedded in, which was harder to do earlier because you come to San Francisco and you're like, yeah, innovation, yes, designers, yes, multiculturalists, then you're sort of in that soup, because there are things that I wanted to be part of, personally. But once I started to actually settle in and look at things with a strange eye, right, it started to become clear that the world I was embedded in, the culture I was embedded in, is rife with all kinds of issues and blind spots and inequities and toxicities, and that all of that is just boiling on as this big soup of these things that we don't need. We don't know how to name and don't really have a good, focusing lenses for a lot of these things.
I am Beth, and I work in community art. A lot of artists are also focusing on art and tech, which branches into science. Those two things come together. It can't just be the art schools that are looking at that, though. There has to be much more interdisciplinary education because our problems are not singular. You can't solve a problem with one tool alone. You need to be able to bring all of those different tools to bear. And one of the assets that artists bring to the table is that artists tend to think. They draw outside the line. They think outside of the box. They're not linear thinkers.
My name is Amber, and I am a researcher and avid burner. I hope that Burning Man can manage to make good on some of the implicit promises of the culture, right? Which would be to really deeply spread the ideas beyond the trash fence. Beyond the trash fence means outside of Black Rock City. Burning Man is like possibility modeling, and we get to experience that. And it rejuvenates us to go back into the normal world and keep pushing for what we want the world to be like.
And now you've left our virtual reality space and are back with the San Jose State team Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley. And now you've had a taste of that experience. And we want to reflect on one of the things that has really driven us to take our ethnography and put it in this immersive experience, which is that we were talking to innovators and creators and experimenters, and we were inspired by their example.
I think probably in most of the places that we studied, the people that we interviewed and the places we did our observations in, there was an element of tinkering and exploration, and this idea that it's kind of an iterative process, and there's collaboration and people from lots of different perspectives and different backgrounds working together to solve a problem. I think we definitely absorbed that, and we were okay with that as a team.
Everything for us kind of began with that initial curiosity, more and more lost in that curiosity, and then that turned into interest and excitement. And by the time we had gotten to actually putting this project together to show to other people, we had come to the mindset that we wanted to inspire those same feelings in everybody else. We wanted them to get curious too. We wanted them to get interested and then excited.
And I think one of the most important and transformative collaborations we had was with Tina Karani, our digital storyteller, because there's this whole new world of things that we absolutely didn't know enough about to be able to make decisions about, well, let's create this kind of space, let's insert this kind of voice, so let's have this kind of object. And so we were co-creating, not knowing our technological limitations and having to discover them and then rethink, oh, well, we can't do that, let's do this. And that process was really transformative. And we could not have done it had we not had the kind of partnership we had with people who had the technical skills to make this happen. So it isn't a common collaboration, but I think it is a very powerful direction for the future.
The demo virtual reality experience is hosted at itch.io, the game name Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley, a virtual ethnography. You can also go to the Silicon Valley Cultures website at svcp.org for more information. Podcast creators include Ella Babin, Melanie Maxwell Bailey, Cheryl Cowan, Jan English-Lueck, Kevin Kochever, Jasmine Lowe, and Daniel Maldonado. The ethnographic research team for Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley Research includes all those just named, as well as Jillian Farini, Christoph Gonzalez, and Ian Torres. Andrew Marley was project manager for the initial phase of the project. Tina Karani, game designer and 3D modeler, led our creative and technical team to create the virtual reality experience with the help of Ameh Hussein Abbaszadeh, Kivan Karani, Milan Kanlu as 3D modeler, Yannick Muller as audio designer and editor, Xingyu Cao as photographer, and John Oakes as technical consultant. We thank the participants of the Reengineering Nature in Silicon Valley project, the citizens of Black Rock City and the members of Sage Camp at Burning Man, the Anthropology and Mass Communications departments, and our funders and supporters at San Jose State University through their research, creative, and professional activity grants. Jan English-Lueck recorded the soundscape The Burn 2019, working with the Burning Man Project's Media Mecca. Music, Man on Fire, was composed by Brett Houston. Background sounds came from the stock online media library Pond 5 for royalty-free media, and interview voices were generated using AI voices from Replica Studios. We want to give a special thanks to Anthony Bolanos and San Jose State University's eCampus for their help in editing this podcast.